Welcome to The Briefing, a co-production of The Appeal and Now This. Today, we're going to be talking about the crisis of policing in Los Angeles and what defunding the Los Angeles Police Department would look like. We're joined by Black Lives Matter Los Angeles co-founder and Cal State LA professor, Dr. Melina Abdullah, and Los Angeles City Council members Herb Wesson, Marquise Harris Dawson, and Mike Bonin. Thank you all for joining us. For the last 7 years, Black Lives Matter has worked to end state-sanctioned violence against Black people and transform oppressive systems. Today, Black Lives Matter is one of the largest human rights movements in US history. Demonstrations against police killings of Black people continue. George Floyd's death and the killing of too many others, before and since, has galvanized a movement that is demanding cities defund police departments and spend that money on community. Cities have started to respond to community calls to defund the police. Los Angeles City Council recently voted 12-2 to cut LAPD's nearly $1.9 billion budget by $150 million following a meeting where Black Lives Matter implored them to reimagine public safety. The Los Angeles Times estimates only 8% of police calls involve violent crimes. Even within that 8%, violence is defined broadly, and some suggest that some 96% of police calls do not require handcuffs or a gun. Los Angeles City Council has agreed to examine how Eugene, Oregon's CAHOOTS model uses health experts to respond to situations involving poverty, mental illness, or substance use. Council members, including our guests today, have called for moving traffic stops from the LAPD to the Department of Transportation. This would cease the practice of LAPD using alleged minor traffic violations to stop and search Black and brown motorists and would dramatically limit the number of interactions between the police and residents of Los Angeles. These are undoubtedly victories for organizers who have long called for abolition and new visions of public health and safety. But it's important to note, first, that these are proposals put forth by the city council members here. These are not yet enacted policies and practices. And second, when enacted, these policies are only a first step towards the budget envisioned by Black Lives Matter LA, which will cut the LAPD budget by 98% and spend that money on housing and neighborhood investments. So let's talk about it. Melina, I'd like to start with you. You said this moment is a testament to the power of the people, although the budget does not go as far as you'd like. How do we get to this moment, and why is the People's Budget LA so important?
Sure, so thank you for having me. I think that it's really important that we understand that people all over this country are recognizing that policing is not something that we can simply reform. It's a fundamentally flawed system. And so that's where the calls to defund the police come, right? But partnered with the call to defund the police is also the call to reimagine public safety. So one of the things that started to happen is, as we saw the disparate impact that COVID-19 as a public health pandemic had on Black communities and the economic fallout had on Black communities, there became a call. We issued a call to cut police spending. And this was a call issued by more than 50 Black-led organizations in Los Angeles. Virtually every single Black-led organization was a part of this call. We issued this to the mayor of the city as we were anticipating his budget being released. And when the budget was released, he completely ignored those calls and in fact increased the share of the budget that was going to LAPD. And so we began this call to defund the police. We said fund services, not police. And this began to gain momentum in the city of Los Angeles. We formed the People's Budget LA Collaborative. We partnered with the Justice Collaborative to build a website and have some social media assets. And then, of course, when George Floyd was killed, I think the world's eyes were opened, recognizing that the system of policing has to go and we have to transform the way we do public safety in this country. And so that's really where it's moving, and it was powered by people. It is powered by people who have flooded the streets, who have developed surveys, who have developed an online presence, and who've come together and said, no longer will we spend upward of 50% of our city's general fund, of the unrestricted fund, on police. And that's true for Los Angeles, but it's also true in most major cities around the country.
So I know you've done a ton of public education, not just in this moment, but for years. How are you having conversations with, like grandmothers and aunties who say, but no, but don't we need police? Don't we need more police to keep us safe? What does that public education look like on your end?
Well, for Black grandmothers and aunties, we're actually not having to have that conversation, right? I don't know any Black person on this earth, and you can correct me if you're the only one I've ever heard of, who feels safer when a police car rolls up behind us, right? We don't. We get anxious, we feel unsafe. And that includes Black mothers and grandmothers and aunties. I'm a Black mama and auntie, right? Not a grandmother, but I'll be there one day, God willing, right? And I understand one of the things that is coming up in our communities is that policing is not the only approach to public safety. And so that is one of the ways in which we're having this conversation. People in my age group, and I'll just be clear, I was born in the 70s, came of age in the 90s, and I'm not that old, right? I have school age children, right? People in my generation understand that when we were coming up, it was those grandmas and aunties and mamas who you're talking about who were our public safety, who sat on the porch and made sure we got to and from school safely, who would discipline us when necessary if we were acting up. And then there was a network in Black communities where our families also knew what we were doing. And we believe that public safety for Black folks especially, but if we can expand it out to other groups as well, really comes from making sure that the universal needs of our people are met, really making sure that the built environment like parks and libraries are well funded, that we have alternative systems of public safety, and that we meet public safety by building community, not policing and criminalizing and brutalizing and even killing our people.
So you gave a very powerful presentation to LA City Council. You explained the people's budget. You talked about the power of community and everything you just mentioned. When we think about the shift of LAPD responsibilities to civilian responders, there's a discussion of like who's going to be at the table, who's going to have a seat at the table. Will community voices be heard in this process? And do you have any like preliminary current concerns?
Yeah, so we're, to be real honest and frank, this is a very strange position for Black Lives Matter. We're used to standing outside a city hall and yelling at people. And we have a different relationship really building. And we've always had lines of communication open, but we're really working with people like Councilmember Herb Wesson and Bonin and Marquise, who's been one of my dearest friends for more than 20 years. We're working with them to talk about how we usher in policy that's true. It's not an appropriation of, but it's true to this call to reimagine public safety. And so one of the things that we're doing in partnership is this Saturday, we're bringing together community members with policymakers who will sit there and listen, not speak, right? About how do community members envision this new model where we have unarmed non-police as the primary responders to nonviolent calls. How do we define nonviolent calls and push back against LAPD, who wants to call everything violence, who wants to call everything a weapon? And so we're having these open dialogues, and we see this as a tremendous step forward. One of the things we talked about in conversation with Marquise, whose motion talks about, this really commonsensical step of having Department of Transportation respond to transportation issues like, traffic collisions, right? There are other models globally, not just the cahoots model, which you raised, but globally, one of the things that Marquise brought up is this really commonsensical practice in Canada, and he'll talk more about it, where if someone's taillight is out, maybe the answer is fixing their taillight, not pulling them over and giving them a ticket and criminalizing them. And if we think about people like Sandra Bland, possibly leading to their deaths. And so we're very excited about kind of turning a corner where we can usher in meaningful policy and being part of the crafting of the implementation of those policies.
Thank you so much. Herb, I'd like to bring you into the conversation. You've called the unanimous council decision to develop an unarmed response unit the dawn of a new era of public safety in Los Angeles. What is different about this moment as compared to previous calls to address the policing crisis? And what do you envision this new era looking like?
Well, I think what's different about this moment is that this is probably the greatest opportunity that we've ever had to actually affect change. And so I'm excited not just about reimagining public safety, but dealing with systems, racist systems in this country. We start with criminal justice reform. That's important, law enforcement reform. But as Dr. Melina Abdullah said earlier, the COVID crisis showed all of the disparities in health, and we could go on to education, but this is the beginning. So I'm very excited about this opportunity, and I think that together you'll see significant progress. We were brought to this moment by the individuals that were out on the street, by the individuals that were banging on the walls of city halls throughout this country. So in order for us to affect the change, we've got to give them a space. We've got to give them a place at the table. And I also believe that this is the beginning of governments, especially progressive governments like Los Angeles, in incorporating the community more. In order for us to succeed, it's gonna take a variety of talents. Yes, it's gonna take Dr. Melina Abdullah and her coalition. It's gonna take the wise, articulate Mike Bonins. It's gonna take the passionate community organizers like Marquise Harris Dawson's. And it's gonna take people like me, folks that spent their entire life doing strategy and tactics, knowing how to get things done, knowing how to box and weave. So all of us together can affect change. And I'll just say this quickly. I did a radio show. I told this to Marquise yesterday in London. And I thought that I was talking about stuff that was revolutionary. And the radio host says, well, that's just common sense. And it's more cost effective. What took you Yanks so long? And that really made me kind of stand still for a moment, because he was right. So if we look at this from just a common sense perspective, there's so many things that we can do to provide services for our community at a reduced cost, where those savings can be used to reinvest in our community, giving our people jobs, giving our people opportunities to help protect our own community. So I am unbelievably excited about this future. And I, for one, will not miss this moment.
Absolutely. And Melina, I know you wanted a chance to jump in and just respond to Herb and call to community.
Yeah, I just wanted to lift up, I mentioned that Marquise has been one of my closest friends for 20 years now. I want to lift up that Herb has also been a dear friend and neighbor, but also how fortunate we are to have elected officials who are willing to take full advantage of this movement moment. And really, I know some of the conversations that we've had and some of what Herb has posted talks about the importance of prioritizing who he is as a Black man, as a grandfather, as a father. And put that ahead of any political aspirations, right? The best political leaders are ones who are willing to be real leaders and be courageous. And maybe there's some political hits that they might take along the way. And we're just so fortunate that we are seeing in this city, and especially through the example of Herb Wesson, someone who's been willing to say, as he runs for another office, you know what, the hit is worth it. And I'm going to do what I believe, and I'm going to put this on you. I know you didn't use these words, but what I'm summoned to do, right? What our ancestors summoned me to do. And so we're just very fortunate to have folks who are willing to step into that and be courageous.
Thank you for that. And thank you for all of the work that all of you are doing. I want to bring Marquise into the conversation now. Marquise, you and your fellow guests introduced a motion that would transfer LAPD traffic response calls to the Department of Transportation. We've talked a little bit about it. What does that change mean to you, and how do you envision this change impacting safety of Black and Latinx drivers? I think you're muted.
There we go. Thank you all for having us and having this discussion. It's, you know, such a joy. I can't think of too many better ways to spend the morning than with, you know, Dr. Molina, Councilman Wesson, and Bonin, and you all talking about this very important issue. I think, you know, what this bill in short, what this action in short seeks to do is make driving while Black a part of history and cancel it in the future. It's no reason for it. It's something that's been going on in this country all over the place. It's frankly become a euphemism, an unfortunate euphemism as a part of our daily lives. And every time in history, at least in my life, where this has come up, I was just talking to a former state senator who got pulled over in 2001. He was a member of the state Senate at that time and put forward a bill to end driving while Black, and he couldn't even get it out of committee. And the Democrats were in charge of everything. And I believe, Councilman, you were speaker at that time when Senator Murray got pulled over in Beverly Hills. And he was just remarking on how every time this issue has come up, the community has basically been told, you got to live with it. There, you know, that's just the way it's going to be. And in fact, if you look around the world, it doesn't have to be. And in fact, what the actions in the streets have been able to dramatize and really make present for a lot of us is it's actually really radical that the idea you have a broken taillight, you get approached by a government worker with a deadly weapon. That doesn't make any sense. And in most parts of the world, that isn't what happens. And so, you know, with the help of my colleagues, Councilman Wesson and Price, we're working with the chair of our transportation committee on the city council to work with our transportation department to take back that work. I'm excited to report that the people in the Department of Transportation are excited to do so. They feel like this is work we could have been doing all along. And at some point it got ceded to the police department. And we would love to take it back. And frankly, they're members of the police department who will tell you, we use up a lot of time and resources doing this, you know, at traffic, you know, filling out reports for insurance companies at accident scenes, right? That's effectively what they're doing. And they're doing it at taxpayers' expense. So I'm very excited about the moment that's been created by activists, and, you know, recognize that, you know, this is the home stretch. And so the people in the streets, you know, have taken it and have, you know, put the baton in our hands as elected officials. And so we got to carry it to the next stage.
I appreciate that. And thank you for actually both you and Molina mentioned this idea that when you're Black and you're driving, you know, like, when do you feel safe, right? When the officer's behind, you know, that moment where it's like, what am I doing? How do I look? Like, am I moving too suddenly? All those things, right? It's really terrifying.
It's one of the most frightening things that happens to you on a regular basis. I mean, I'm a member of the city council. We theoretically have jurisdiction over LAPD. I got pulled over in January.
Yep.
You know, I'm with my wife. The officer's holding a gun, you know, as if there's some reason he's going to have to shoot one of us. I mean, it's just, you know, again, it is ridiculous. This is something that's too much a part of daily life. And I think we have an opportunity to end it.
So you mentioned finishing the race. How do we finish the race? I know it's a proposal. How do we get to the finish line with policy? What's next?
Well, this policy, I think both this and the reimagine motion that Councilman Weston's leading out, we'll have a process. We'll get the best thinkers in the room. There are folks that have been thinking about this for years and years and years. So they have really good ideas, and we will formulate specific recommendations that'll be put in front of the city council. They'll vote on it. The city council and the mayor will vote on it and pass it. And then it's going to be up to the workers. It's going to be up to the workers in the community. I mean, that's the other part of it. One of the questions that we want to lift here is what police officers do the best way to create traffic safety, as an example, right? So we're not necessarily saying we're going to take a police officer off the motorbike with a radar gun and we're going to put a DOT worker on a motorcycle with a radar gun. We need to look at if that's even the best way to get people to slow down. I'll give an example that everybody on this call who's from LA can appreciate. On Slauson between Overhill and Crenshaw has been a speed trap my entire life. No one's ever said, hey, maybe that guy that sits on the motorbike with a radar gun on Alviso giving people tickets, maybe that doesn't work because people still go very fast on Slauson. And, me and Melina are about the same age. No one slows down. So maybe that doesn't work. Maybe there's another way to create traffic safety altogether. And this is an opportunity to look at that.
Absolutely. Mike, I'd like to bring you in. So recently you conducted a survey of your constituents that found that non-police responders that respond to most situations LAPD is currently tasked with, your constituents actually supported this shift. So how have your conversations with constituents changed in the past few months? And what do you envision?
Yeah, I would say conversations with my constituents have changed dramatically in the past few months. For those who aren't familiar with Los Angeles, I represent one of the whiter parts of the city. It's the predominantly white, predominantly wealthy west side of Los Angeles. And it's not the part of town that intuitively jumps to this issue of reimagining public safety. I think in this moment, post George Floyd, this BLM moment where, as Melina has pointed out, the world has broken open, white people have come to an understanding greater than ever before that there is a system of public safety that may make them feel personally safe, but makes other people feel unsafe and makes their life imperiled. And that's not good enough. And so common sense, when you ask a question, do you think we need more police? Most people intuitively on my part of town have historically said yes. But if you ask them the common sense questions of, does the following situation, and I listed 30 of them, require a government agent with the authority to use deadly force? In almost all situations, sort of violent crime, people say no. They don't think police should be the first responders in schools or on mass transit or in our parks. They don't think that police officers should be the ones responding to mental health or homelessness issues. And they really, really do not believe that people should have police officers being the first responders for traffic issues. They don't believe they should be responding to collisions, fare evasion on mass transit, enforcing speed limits, traffic control. And as I'm in a unique position where I'm chair of our transportation committee, and I'm also a member of the board of directors of our regional transit agency, the Metro Board. And so in addition to this focus that we're talking about with Herb and Marquise legislatively, also trying to get policing out of our transit system, both in LAPD's traffic stops and in fare evasion enforcement on our transit system. There is data, there is evidence that shows that the enforcement is discriminatory, that there are disproportionate numbers of Blacks and Latinos who are being stopped and enforced against. And to eradicate and dismantle systemic and structural racism, it's not a magic wand. I mean, you got to pull it out brick by brick. And the area where I'm going to be focusing is transportation, because if you don't have freedom of movement, you're not free. And there are neighborhoods in Los Angeles where because of historic disinvestment and because of an overemphasis on policing, people do not feel safe either walking to the bus or even riding a bicycle because they're afraid they're going to be pulled over. And if people don't have equal access to mobility in Los Angeles, something is fundamentally wrong. And every part of Los Angeles, every demographic in Los Angeles, and every council district in Los Angeles has to be part of deconstructing the problem and doing the hard work of building the solution.
So what are the next steps of deconstructing? You mentioned the transit system, freedom of movement. What are the next steps for that? And is it defunding transit police? Is it bringing it? What happens next?
The next thing is we have to do what Melina was talking about, is we have to be listening. In both processes, both the city and our Metro Board, the goal is to be listening to the community, have them not just define the problem, but help us define the solution and then implement it. So I imagine, we haven't discussed it yet, but I imagine Herb and I will be doing some joint hearings, his ad hoc committee on police reform and transportation committee on the city issue. And we will be listening to people from the community on how to be shaping that. There are some models that are there, the taillight example, the DUI example, and in some cases we're doing something new. And as Herb has always said, the winds in this country blow from the west to the east. And if we need to create new things, working with the community, we will do that. And when you create the new things, if you reprogram, if you change who is responsible for enforcing this or doing this, the money follows. So I'm very focused on making the changes we need, and the dollars are going to go where the actual programming and the changes are.
Absolutely. So, I know a lot of you have to run, but I want to give each of you an opportunity to just give some words of wisdom, some hope for the moment before we call it. Starting with you, Melina.
Sure. I think that this is just an incredible moment, right? This Black Lives Matter moment is not just about what we think or feel or believe. This is about saving the real lives of real people. So I think about Keith Bursey when I think about, Department of Transportation responding instead of police. I think about Daniel Hernandez when I think about that. I think about Grishario Mack when I think about the idea of unarmed non-police responding to a mental health crisis, that these are real people whose lives could have been saved if we had have dared to be imaginative before. But being imaginative now and committing ourselves now and being courageous now will save the lives of people moving forward. And we're doing this for all of our people, for our own children. And we're doing it in the name of all of those folks who we just mentioned, right? So this is not just about policy. This is about real lives. And I'm just very grateful to be a part of a movement that has ushered this in. And I'm grateful that there are some folks in elective office willing to heed the call.
Thank you for always saying their names and just invoking the humanity of real people that have been impacted and that will continue to be impacted by all of this. Herb?
I was at a rally not too long ago, and there was a white girl, about 18, 19 years old, and she had a sign, and her sign read, "I understand that I will never understand. However, I stand with you." This is the greatest opportunity for change in this country for Black people, and I realize this. There are individuals that are pulling and praying for us to succeed. But I realize there are individuals that are pulling and praying for us to fail. We cannot lose the day. We must win. If we lose the day, and Mike, I'm just going to use you as an example because I'm looking in your gorgeous white face. If we lose the day, white people will still be able to drive all around this country and not worry about being stopped by the color because of the color of their skin, or being rejected for a job because of the color or their skin, or from an environmental justice perspective, they'll never have to be concerned that their zip code might dictate their lifespan. But for Black people, this means everything. This battle must be won. And it must be won because of my grandchildren and your children. We want them to have the opportunity to fly as far as their imagination and their abilities will take them. And if we don't change several systems within this country, that will not occur. This is the moment. This is the time. Politics be damned. Let us change the world. So I'm excited about this opportunity, and I'm so grateful of all of the individuals from different races, from different parts of this country that are standing at our right, standing at our left, standing at our back. I really appreciate you. But this last flag of freedom and justice that must be planted in this country has to be planted by Black people. So you can get in the bus with us, but you can't drive. Thank you.
Mike, I think Herb called on you.
I'm happy not to be driving. It's hard to say anything other than amen to what Herb and Melina have said. This is a moment that I think is unlike any other that I've experienced. And I think what is unique, not only is sort of this great awakening happening, but I think that people are more aware that they are living and have the potential to make history than they usually do. I don't think that there is anybody who thinks that they are a bystander. People know that this is a moment. And what I've noticed in my part of town is that even the Karens of the world are out on the corners attending rallies and protests. Someone who a few months ago might have called 911 is now looking in the mirror and saying, something is wrong with this, and I have a role in helping to fix it. I do not doubt or question anybody who is skeptical of whether or not white people are still going to be there. Because whether you go from Reconstruction to the civil rights movement, there's been a history of a lot of promises, and then white people move on and go about their business. That definitely is a risk here. But I think that the pressure is on. I think people are looking in the mirror and asking the right questions. And I think people understand that the beneficiaries of structural racism have to be part of the effort, not leading, but be part of the effort to back up those planting the flag, to tear those bricks down. And as long as BLM stays in the streets, and as long as Melina holds me and Marquise and Herb accountable the moment we step back or waver, that heat can keep coming and that attention can keep coming, and we can take those steps forward. And I'm happy to march behind Herb and Marquise and Melina every step of the way.
Appreciate that. Marquise, can you close us out?
Yeah, no, thank you. I look, I associate myself with all the comments, certainly Dr. Molina and my two colleagues on the council, council members Wesson and Bon. And, you know, I am in an intense state of gratitude. You know, when I made the decision and in some ways sacrificed to decide to enter public life and be an elected official, which means different than being an activist. You can't always say what you want, when you want, where you want, to who you want to. You operate inside some constraints. Activists have created a situation where we're going to get to be a part of more change during this time on the council than I ever imagined. I thought we'd be able to do some work to, clean up our neighborhood and improve our streets and improve some of the conditions there. Never did I think we would be able to have the potential even for this type of breakthrough and create a situation where the idea that a police officer is going to enter your space and somehow you or another Black person is going to end up dead, that we could dramatically change that reality for the Black people that live in Los Angeles, but people beyond the Black community. I am silenced by the awesomeness of that opportunity, and so I'm just very grateful. We're going to work as hard as we can to do it. All of us, I believe, will work hard to honor everybody who's gotten locked up, everybody who spent the night in the streets, everybody who gave up a fun activity to press the point over the years. And I especially remember the times when it wasn't popular and when it wasn't the headline on the news and when people were saying things like, man, don't they realize this, what they're doing isn't going to working. They should just go away. I especially recognize that because that's when the movements are the toughest, but that's when the seeds are planted and that's when the basis for change is created. And so we're happy to be in this moment. We want to make the most of it and do right by our ancestors, but most importantly, do right by the people coming behind us.
Thank you for that recognition. I know I held all of you over, so you could blame me. And Melina, and to each of you, thank you for building a movement and not a moment, because you're exactly right. This wasn't always popular. Black Lives Matter for many years was kind of ignored as a fringe movement. So really respect that. And for all our viewers out there, thank you for joining us again. And I would look forward to welcoming you all back on the briefing, because it's been great for me. But yeah, apologies for holding you over, and